So, hello. Hope all's going well. Um, we are back. This is episode 11. So, we have this episode and then one more episode, and then we will call it quits when it comes to this particular series, right? Your brand strategy in a crisis. But, we have some other things I do want to talk about that. So, chances are this will be a series that I may come back to from time to time. I don't know if episode 12 is going to be like I'm finishing up reading The Prepared Leader by Erica James. And so I don't know if I'm gonna finish that up in time for episode 12. But so maybe that might be episode 13 or 14 or something to that effect. Something you definitely want to revisit in this series. And so, this series may just be one where we come back from time to time to discuss a few things. So, and then, I've kind of said this before, for those who may not familiar, I need to figure out how to play my intro music so I can while I am recording, or at least in the beginning, so I can go back to doing this live. Because I've done this live. There's one particular software that I was using before, but I'm trying not to use that one anymore. Nothing wrong with it. I just want to use something different, but I haven't figured out like a better alternative, I guess I should say. So let's get into it. You must look back to see how your decisions have played out, right? So we're talking about debriefing after a brand crisis. Debriefing after a brand crisis. So it's important for you to look back to see how your decisions played out, right? No matter if you did good, no matter if you did bad, you've made good decisions, bad decisions, right? If you were not responsible, someone else was responsible, it's important to look back and see how those decisions played out. You want to take a minute, take a day, maybe take 2 days literally to debrief with yourself and with your team. So welcome to Strategy with Dr. M. Stolard. This series is entitled Your Brand Strategy in a Crisis. This is episode 11. So for those who may be new, or this is your first time coming across my content or this podcast, then let's back up a little bit. Right now, we're in a series about brand crisis. What is a brand crisis? A brand crisis is a series of negative events that have created or presented an emergency that directly affects your organization, right? Your brand. This crisis is not addressed, then the result is failure, company failure, organizational failure, brand failure, right? So who do I talk to? I talk to community organizations. I talk to nonprofits, and I talk to, so churches. That's who my messages tends to be for. But I tend to use the term organizations and community organizations interchangeably. So, but it doesn't mean that if you're, say a small business owner or aspiring entrepreneur or otherwise, then you can't get some good value from this particular content. So just want to be clear, just because I talk towards community organizations, because those who I tend to work with, when I look back at the history of the people who I felt like my business specifically, in the consulting side and the strategy side, who was working with, those were the type of organizations that I was involved with. And sometimes I also feel that a lot of us who are, you call yourself a coach or a consulting or business consultant, we tend to talk to quote unquote for-profit businesses, which is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But then we tend to leave out, the social entrepreneur, right? Those who are actually around to actually do good for the organization, do good for the community, and so, but they need marketing and branding information too. And so that's where I kind of fit in. So in times of a brand crisis, it's important for companies to provide the right resources, right? And support for your employees and for your community. So this will help them to stay informed, depending on what's going on, how big the crisis is, and, help them to also be prepared for future crises if possible, or if another situation may arise, this is where you come in. So I want you to think about it like this. When a brand crisis presents itself, one item that can be a little complex and create a little uncertainty, especially, is the area of marketing and the organizational brand, right? And it's important for you to stand up and not let the organization just simply get rid of the marketing and the branding side. Don't let them just simply cut the marketing budget. It's like one of the first things that tends to go all the time. They feel like you don't necessarily need to have a marketing budget. And everybody's going to defend their respective departments, accounting and R&R or whatever it may be, right? ministries and so forth. But specifically talking about a brand crisis, how are you going to repair the brand if there's no budget to do so? Right? How are you going to repair the brand if there's no marketing or branding budget to do so? Right? So, one of the ways to prepare yourself is to have a thorough brand strategy debrief after the crisis. Right? So, hello, I'm Dr. M. Stolard, Entrepreneurial Strategist, helping to cultivate brand clarity for community organizations and those that want to create social impact. And we do this through strategy. So, first, got a few steps for you, right? I do everything in steps. So you want to, when it's time for you to debrief, you want to evaluate the situation, right? The first step is to evaluate the brand crisis that took place, determine what was the extent of the damage, right? Gather all of the relevant information, talk to the key people, the people who are closer to the ground. This includes media coverage, right? Social media mentions. And we talked about this in my previous episodes where there's some tools that you can use, and not all of them are free. They may have some free trials where you can actually look for your mentions on various social media avenues and see how people are talking about you. Now, if you're a smaller organization, chances are your mentions may not be as much, and that's okay. And that's okay, right? Especially if it's a brand crisis that's considered negative, right? But think of it also like Google Alerts, Google Alerts. You can use Google Alert. Those are definitely a free resource. At least they're free as of right now, that you can use to kind of track and evaluate the situation and how people are talking about your organization, right? Another aspect of that is customer feedback, right? So taking a look at Google Alerts and you looking at social media mentions and so forth are all going to be helping to better evaluate the situation. And you kind of want to do that first, right? Once you quote unquote have declared that the brand crisis may be over, you shouldn't be starting this at the last minute, but you want to definitely say, you know what, I'm going to evaluate the situation. Second thing you want to do is identify the root cause, right? Identify the root cause. It's one of the first questions. Second questions you want to ask, what's going on? What happened, right? What was the cause of this particular issue? So now that it's over, you want to make sure you have a clear identification of that root cause, right? And once you have evaluated the situation, you want to identify the cause of that particular crisis. You want to determine what went wrong and why, right? What could have been, and then there's something could have been done to prevent it. And something had been done to prevent it. Okay. Again, we're talking about debriefing. So the next thing you want to look into is to review your crisis management plan, right? So a lot of you here, because you may not have a plan. Okay, but if you have enough, at least for the first 11 episodes, I'll give you enough information and resources and people who are actually considered experts in that field to kind of help you in that regard. Now, we're looking at a brand crisis, or as a crisis from the brand strategy component of it, right? But there's people who actually deal with brand crisis, who deal with crises on a significant level. Erica James, I just mentioned her earlier, right? Dr. Dutch Leonard, right? He's a Harvard business professor. Dr. Erica James is actually a professor over at Wharton. And then, of course, Judy Smith. I talked about Judy Smith a few episodes ago. She is a crisis management expert, best known or most popular known because of the TV show Scandal, where her quote unquote life is loosely based off of, right? So number 3, you want to review the crisis management plan, review your crisis management plan, determine if it is effective in dealing with the crisis, identify any gaps or weaknesses in the plan, and make necessary changes. One of those things that I created for you was like a 50 question questionnaire where you need to make sure you can answer all those questions, because these are the questions you'd have to basically talk to. Let's kind of decide if you're talking to the journalist, but be able to talk to anybody, internally or externally. And you get the answers to those particular questions specifically, right? So again, we're talking about debriefing after a brand crisis, right? So then you want to analyze your response. Part of debriefing is taking the time to look at and see, what was the response that we were giving or that you were giving? Was it accurate, right? Was it transparent? Was it effective? Analyze your response to the brand crisis including your messaging. What was your messaging? Your communication channels, right? The timing of it. Did you wait too long to speak, right? Or should you have gone a little bit quicker? Or should you have taken more time to gather more information, you know? One of the things we talk about is, you know, you want to be able to speak quickly, you want to be able to speak as soon as possible, but you don't have to rush it, right? You don't have to rush it. So, and then when you're doing that, when you are analyzing your response, you want to determine what worked, what did not work, right? And what could have been done differently. What worked, what did not work, and what could have been done differently. So the next thing you want to look at is to assess the impact on your brand. Assess the impact on your brand. Assess the impact of the brand crisis on your brand. You know, how is your reputation looking? How is your customer loyalty? Are people just leaving in droves? Are sales declining, right? Are donating money? Are the donators, are they stopping? If you're one that has a consistent donation on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, has that stopped or has that declined? You know, if you sell merch, right, and you know that you normally sell merch, you know, are the sales declining in that aspect? You know, determine what steps need to be taken to rebuild the trust of your donors, of your volunteers, your stakeholders, right? You know, and if necessary, do what you need to do to restore your brand's image, right? Restore your brand's image, and it's got to be genuine. It can't just be quote unquote. We hear the phrase kissing babies, you know, politicians tend to do that. But sometimes people have gotten wind of the fact that sometimes politicians are not really, you know, they're not coming from a genuine space, right? But you as a community organization, you want to make sure that you are, right? So determine what steps you need to take to, you know, rebuild the trust, right, of the people you serve, rebuild the trust of the people who need you and your organization's brand image, right? Next, you want to develop a recovery plan. Develop a recovery plan that outlines the steps you will take to address the root cause of the crisis, you know? And then you want to make sure you, again, rebuild the trust with your customers, restore the brand's image. This plan should include specific actions and timelines and metrics, you know, to measure progress, right? Right? So this will be part of your recovery plan, right? So you have a crisis management plan, which is basically what you are doing in the midst of the crisis, how are you managing it? And then the recovery plan, meaning right now, you have your debrief, and then what do you do now to recover the plan? And some of that recovery means, you know, addressing what's the root cause of it and what needs to do to rebuild the trust and so forth, right? And it's okay to have some overlap, right? Your debriefing conversation and your recovery plan, you can have some overlap with that, and that's completely fine, right? So again, you know, it includes specific actions, what needs to be measured, timelines and metrics and so forth. And it's not just sales, it's loyalty, you know, it's maybe the interaction with your clients and your customers, your stakeholders, right? And that leads me to my next point. Communicate with the stakeholders. Communicate with the people who are volunteers, those who are on staff, including your employees, your customers, the people you serve, right? Partners, investors, you know, make sure you communicate with them about the crisis and, you know, as part of your recovery plan, right? Don't leave people in the wind. You want to make sure you're transparent. You want to make sure you're honest and empathetic in your communication. Empathy basically means that you understand, it's not just that you understand that they're in the middle of an issue, but because of this particular issue, because they can't get a hold of your product or service, because they are basically feeling like they're alone, how does that make them feel? Right? I'm sorry that you're feeling like you're by yourself. I'm sorry that you feel like you're left isolated. You know, that's not our intention. You know, we're talking about the empathy through true, genuine empathy and the benefit of a community organization, the benefit of a social entrepreneur is because this is what you do, right? You can come from a genuine place. If you wanted to just, start a business and make lots of money, which we all do at some level, that's fine, right? You could have went that direction, but if you're choosing to build a community organization that's going to serve the community, right, then that means you know how to be empathetic. And it's your responsibility to do so. It's no one else's, it's yours. And you, those who work in the marketing sector, it's your responsibility to make sure that's conveyed from a genuine space, right? There's a couple, two more points. You want to monitor the progress, right? So this one you want to monitor for not just 2 weeks after the brand crisis is declared over. You want to monitor it 6 months from now, a year from now, right? So COVID is a interesting topic, but what I will tell you is that those who are monitoring COVID, right, are monitoring it constantly, not just whenever the quote unquote president said, you know what, we can go down to that it's not as serious and it's not as dangerous and so forth. But people are still monitoring to make sure that it's not ramping back up, in the respective states and respective cities. And some of those people, their responsibilities. And the same thing you have to do for your organization. You want to monitor the progress. So the brand crisis is considered over. So now you need to monitor progress against your recovery plan, and then adjust if necessary. Is what you're doing helping people to regain the trust? Is what you're doing getting people to spend more money back with you? I just want to be plain because, if you're selling merch and so forth, that's part of how you feed your family, right? Then this is want to make sure that that's also is coming back, it's building back up, right? So again, keep stakeholders, volunteers informed of your progress, and any changes to the plan that you're making. And the last one, you just want to make sure you learn from this experience, right? Learn from this experience and use it to improve your brand strategy. In order to improve your brand strategy and your brand strategy in a crisis, right? What is your brand strategy in a crisis or your crisis management plan, right? So you want to conduct a post-mortem analysis to identify the lessons learned, make the necessary changes to prevent similar crises in the future, and some of that comes with writing, right? And don't be afraid to write. It's okay. Come with the write and might have a clear, succinct plan. And so if you can follow these steps that I gave you, you'll have an effective debriefing session, after a brand crisis, and it's going to help you to take the necessary actions to recover and to rebuild your brand, to rebuild your organization. So that's all I have for you today. Let me know what kind of resources, may be beneficial to you. I am Dr. M. Stolard, and remember to keep pushing forward, drive your influence, and be intentional by using strategy.